Ponton podcast, and today we have Kerry Baker. You know he's one of my favorites, and we are here to answer the questions and try to help you with VA law and also to learn from you. About the middle of the program, we want to talk about a subject that we're really concerned about. Great benefits, but we don't think anybody's taking advantage of it. So we're going to wait and do that right about the middle, but let's start off. What's our first question, Nate? C&P exam per higher level review was an appeal for increase. The examiner changed the code of my service connection mechanical back to lumbo strain. Will that help with my DDD degenerative disc disease and scoliosis to get approved? Scoliosis diagnosis is in my service medical records. Kerry, what do you think?
The examiner probably didn't change the diagnostic code because that's done at the rating level. There is no diagnostic code, pretty sure, at least for mechanical low back pain. It would be rated under a different code. There is a code, however, for lumbosacral strain, which is different than the code from degenerative disc disease or intervertebral disc syndrome. What you got to watch out for, ultimately, you're probably going for the intervertebral disc syndrome, which is the DDD he's referring to, the degenerative disc disease. We see a lot, and I know you see it too, Carol, where there's a lumbar strain service connected. It progresses to the point of disc disease and arthritis and all that, and then the examiners come back and say, well, that's got nothing to do with the actual lumbar strain, that they're different and that one doesn't cause the other. Well, we know that's not true. Chronic lumbar strains absolutely lead to degenerative disc disease or intervertebral disc syndrome. It's chronic wear and tear that does that. Now, as the scoliosis goes, that's typically something they might say existed prior to service as a congenital defect, but you don't need the scoliosis. You just need the degenerative disc disease service connected to get the potential maximum rating for your back problem. Whether they call it strain, mechanical low back pain, you want it rated under degenerative disc disease or intervertebral disc syndrome, as it is in the rating schedule. So without knowing what the medical opinions say and what they're considering the problem was in service, it's hard to say, but you want to watch out for them saying, no, your degenerative disc disease has nothing to do with the lumbar strain that might be service connected, which we all know is not the case.
Yeah, but unfortunately we see it a lot. So we hope it helps you, but we're not optimistic. I'm 65-year-old, just received total unemployability, permanent and total. The rating letter has errors, mild radiculopathy, 10% instead of moderately severe, 40%, which is supported by the C&P results. Take to a higher level review to correct or not? Thanks. Kerry, what would you do?
If the effective date of the TDIU is correct, I would not do a thing, because whether they rate it, the radiculopathy, at 10% or 40%, it's not going to change your overall TDIU. You have no benefit to gain by fighting the rating for the radiculopathy if the radiculopathy is already taken into account for the unemployability. You have nothing to gain. If the TDIU effective date's wrong, which most are, then I would look at that, but I would not appeal a rating that's not going to change the ultimate finding of TDIU.
And this is so important, Kerry, and we see this so often with our veterans. Something will be an error, but it really doesn't make any difference. And that's what you need to look at. For instance, they may have called your back problem, as we had me earlier, mechanical or whatever. But if they give you service connection, and if you're getting the benefit you think you're entitled to, and you couldn't get a higher one, don't mess with it. It doesn't matter what they call it so often, do you have it service connected and is it giving the benefit you want? Don't ever file an appeal unless you know exactly what you think you can get out of this that is more than you already have. That's great advice. Nate? Second error, in 2 previous ratings, I saw an issue of unemployability raised by the VRO to the compensation and pension document, but no reply or wrong answer to the question. Is this raised by the record issue? Once again, don't you think if you got the date you wanted, you don't fool with it? Anything you'd add, Kerry?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to answer that with that little bit of info. I'm assuming this is the same.
Right, it's the same person.
Then, I mean, you've already got TDIU, so do whether it's raised by the record or not, does that matter? I mean, because you obviously expressly raised it because they've granted it. The only time I would be concerned with whether it's raised by the record is for effective date purposes.
Exactly.
If you can get an earlier effective date for it, without challenging the merits of the TDIU or any of the disabilities on which the merits of the TDIU are based, then I would appeal for an earlier effective date. But that's not the case. I would leave it alone.
Me too. Nate? I was denied for restless leg syndrome in 2017. I went to a burn pit examination and the examiner advised me to put in a claim for restless leg due to Gulf War illness. Since it was denied in 2017, should I put in a supplemental claim or start a new claim? The old claim was RLS due to sleep apnea. Kerry?
Well, you're not going to want to you are putting a new claim in, so to speak. So don't get the two mixed up. But no, you need to use a supplemental claim form if it's been denied in the past. VA will reject it and will cancel your claim without doing anything other if you do it on a 526. That's only for an increased rating, or no decision within the past year, or you're filing for an original claim for service connection where the condition's not been addressed in the past. So in this instance, yes, you use a supplemental claim form. I would not file it secondary to sleep apnea, but it is in my opinion, a valid claim under a Gulf War illness. Simply because I think in a lot of such cases, there's not a well understood or a known etiology for the restless leg syndrome. And if that's the case, then it can qualify as a medically unexplained chronic multi-symptom illness under 3.317, which is the Gulf War regulations. Not an easy case,
No,
because it's not an easy subject.
exactly.
But it is winnable. You might need somebody that knows Gulf War issues, and there just isn't many of those people out there.
Not working at the VA.
No.
Okay, so remember, Kerry's telling you file an 0995. Do not file a 526. And this is another thing that really breaks my heart. I have veterans who come to me and they would have, from 2015, try to be filing a new claim again and keep filing the wrong claim. So remember, there are only 2 claim forms, 526 or 0995. If they tell you you filed the wrong form, file the one you didn't file, but don't ignore them because your claim just sits there and dies. Okay. Next question, Nate. Submitted for anxiety and major depressive, service-connected migraines. Psychologist wrote a letter indicating my mental health symptoms began during military, not specific to migraines. Will this work?
Wait
a minute. Also, my therapy was only 8 sessions and ongoing. Is this enough for the VA to go off on, even with access to my session notes? Sorry.
Well, it doesn't matter. There's no requirement for a certain level of treatment. Certain place you get treatment. So don't look at it like that. We only got 8 therapy sessions. That shouldn't matter. Okay. But if the examiner had a sound basis for saying that the condition began during military service, that's really what you want.
Right.
Because then, most people look for a nexus to something that happened in service, or a nexus to something that's already service connected. But if the examiner can place the onset of your condition during military service, then there is no need sometimes, right, for the nexus, because it began during military service.
Right.
And that's even with PTSD that typically requires a stressor. If it's shown to have began during military service, you don't even need the stressor, and there's general counsel opinion.
Exactly.
So yeah, that not knowing anything else, they can reject a favorable opinion. Just know that. They need to have
Can and do.
Yeah, and they should have a basis for doing so. But I mean, if you went to a C&P exam and they said, yeah, based on your service treatment records and blah blah blah, this condition began during service, that's what you want.
Right. But I always never give up anything. I'll say it's directly to service, and or it could be secondary to, so that they have to evaluate all of those. It's really funny. Sometimes the examiners will say no, 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 and then say yes all of a sudden. So you want to, if you have a basis for the service connection, you always want to allege all of them that are real possibilities.
Yeah. It reminds me of the case law that tells VA that you have to consider all theories of entitlement.
Exactly.
VA a lot of times will not consider all theories of entitlement, because they will focus on the one theory that you might have raised and expressly did not raise any other theories. So
right.
when there's more than one possible theory of entitlement, you want to make sure you raise them all, even though they're supposed to consider them all anyway. They
don't ever. They only consider what they think was raised. So that's when I get that denial, I file a higher level review. I allege a duty to assist error and point out that these are I think the veteran thinks that these issues caused the service connected problem and they were not evaluated. And they will almost always give you a C&P exam to evaluate those. So, Nate, if an appeal is remanded back, is that a good thing, or is it best for the BVA to give a decision? Kerry?
Yes, and all of the above, and none of the above, all at the same time. It depends on why they remand it. It can be. It's not a bad thing. It's not a denial.
Right.
And so, in that sense, it could definitely be worse. If VA at the local level just didn't do their job, which, surprise, and they didn't develop anything, then yeah, you kind of need it to be remanded by the board, or the board tells them, yeah, you violated your duty to assist. You go out and do A, B, C, and D, and then redecide the case. Well, they have to do that. You have enforceable rights once the board remands a case, if the RO doesn't follow those remand instructions. So definitely can be a good thing. It can also be a bad thing if they should have made a decision but sent it back on some minor technicality. If they're trying to tank the case, don't think that board judges don't do that. Some of them do. They will all say they don't. But I mean, we all know better. Some of them do try to tank a case.
I know, Kerry, I worked for the federal court, and it was always my opinion that the first thing the judge did was say, how can I get rid of this without deciding it? And they literally, is it not jurisdictional, whatever. And I think that goes on too much today. But when I get a remand, I go, at least it wasn't a denial. I'm angry that the veteran has to wait longer, but often I find, if there was really good evidence and they remanded it, then maybe we dodged a bullet, because this was a very hard judge and they didn't want to give benefits. And this gives me another chance. And as long as my veteran didn't have a hearing, I have a good chance of getting a different judge. I've seen a lot of remands where they say exactly what you say. You didn't evaluate the veteran for this. And a lot of times you end up with a favorable decision at the regional office. So it really depends on what the remand says who the judge was. It's really hard to answer your question without knowing a lot more.
And I believe in AMA now, in the Appeals Modernization Act, and I don't think I realized this before, is that if you have a hearing with the board, they don't have to have the same judge make.
Really?
I had a hearing on an AMA case earlier this year, and it was a different judge that came out with the decision.
Wow.
Not the one that had the hearing. They didn't offer. They did. Sometimes you'll see the board say,
Yeah.
well, the hearing that judge left. He's no longer here. We'll give you an opportunity for another hearing, or we can decide it on, with the hearing transcript of record. None of that happened in this case. They just had another judge issue the decision. And I didn't pick up on the fact initially. Well, I thought they made a mistake, but I believe it's in the AMA that allows them to do that, which is a little surprising.
But great as far as I'm concerned, because being wedded to a judge who has given you a negative opinion is the kiss of death.
Yeah.
They don't change their minds.
Yeah, if you can't get away from that bad judge,
no.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah. What's the difference between an AMA claim and a legacy claim? I've got a claim waiting to see a judge that's been sitting there almost 4 years. It was sent to them in March of 2020. Kerry, you want to tell them the bad news?
Yeah, you probably have an AMA claim. Appeals Modernization Act is what the AMA stands for. That came into effect by congressional action and presidential approval in February of 2019. All right. Every new claim filed after that date is automatically in the AMA, whether you like it or not. And every new decision that awards benefits after that date, even if it was initially pending under the legacy system, if it's granting a benefit and that decision came after February of 2019, then that too now puts you in the AMA. So you don't have the right now, you don't have the option of filing a legacy claim. All claims right now and all initial appeals are AMA. If you had anything pending before VA prior to February of 2019, it was pending under the legacy system. It's the only system that existed. If that same appeal is still going on, right, in the same context, so in other words, you were fighting to get service connection for a mental health condition, hypothetically, and you've been fighting that since 2015, and it was in the legacy system, and now you're in 2023, and it's been back and forth before the Board of Veterans Appeals, and you've never opted into the AMA, you should still be in the legacy system. I would not. Now, some people would disagree with me on this, and I get it. But I would not take any case nowadays from legacy and switch to AMA.
Exactly.
I would not do it. I think AMA is for the most part, there are some good parts, but my personal opinion is it stinks. It's a terrible set of laws, in my opinion. But it's the world that we're living in now. You can't, once you're in it, you can't go back to the legacy system. So if that decision that you appealed in March of 2020 was from a decision from February of 2019 and beyond, which I would think it would have to be, you only have a year to appeal it, then you most likely have an AMA appeal with the Board of Veterans Appeals. If it had been on appeal prior to that, prior to February 2019, you could have a legacy, but it doesn't sound like you do.
Right. So, and you can look at what you filed. Did you file a VA-9? If you did, that's legacy. If you filed direct appeal, 90 days, or an evidentiary hearing, not a VA-9, then you're in the AMA system. And what makes me so angry is the VA came out with this, and they offered us a chance to go into the AMA. And knowing the VA, all of a sudden, I'm not doing that. Whenever you offer us something, it's not good for our veteran. And then they fooled us. They said, well, number one, if you're in the AMA and you're denied, you can keep that onset date, even if you're denied, as long as you show new and relevant evidence or new material. And second, we're going to do these board appeals much quicker than the ones you have. And so we started opting in, and the cases were decided really quickly. And then after we'd opted in, they said, oops, guess what? We're going to only do the legacy appeals until they're all done. And then we'll do the AMAs, which is why they're all sitting there. So once again, the VA conned us. And I'm really angry because there's nothing we can do. Those AMA cases have been sitting there, not only from 2020, but Kerry, I have some from 2018 that are sitting there. And a lot of them, the basis of other claims is the one at the board. And so the other claims are just not getting anywhere because we can't get a decision. And the only AMA cases I can move basically are the ones where they're 75 or older, they have a Purple Heart, Medal of Honor, eviction, foreclosure, terminal illness. Otherwise, they're all sitting there. So shame on you, VA, for what you did.
And what I would advise people on that, because there's still a lot of cases you were just going to have to go to the Court of Veterans Appeals with in order to get a good decision. And some people get upset at us when we take their case to the board. We don't have a choice. At some point we have to get it to the board.
Right.
If you're doing your own case, at some point you're going to have to get it to the board. You don't want to stay forever in the regional office, which under AMA you can go back and forth between the higher level review and the supplemental claim lane almost indefinitely. You don't want to do that. All right, you want to get it to the board. But my advice is real simple on this. You got 3 lanes to choose at the board. You got the hearing lane, the evidence lane, and the direct review lane. Do not choose the evidence lane and the hearing lane. Okay? Choose the direct review lane, which means you can't give the board new evidence to consider with the appeal. So if you have new evidence, you have to submit a supplemental claim at the local level. Let them decide it. If it still doesn't go your way, then do a direct review appeal into the board under AMA, only direct review. Those are still being done a little bit faster. They say it's about a year. I don't really believe that, but still, if it's a year and a half, let's just say that's much faster than the evidence lane and the hearing lane right now. Whatever you do, not choose those 2 lanes.
Kerry, I did the evidence lane because I was finding when we were doing the AMA and they were actually acting on them, I found that a lot of the judges who did the direct were brand new judges and they didn't know anything. They were giving decisions, that's what worries me.
The same thing. When the AMA first came out, you remember, Carol, that the board themselves were saying that in fact, in a lot of cases, I used the evidence lane because they were roughly about 8 months, give or take, according to the board's own website, whereas and the direct review lane was about 6 months. So you're only talking a difference of 60 days and you get a chance to submit additional evidence. So I too chose the evidence lane on a lot of cases. And at that point in time, none of us knew that what the board had was incorrect, what they were putting out to the public. Had I had to do it over again, I would have taken all those and put them in the direct review lane. And fortunately, can't do it now. So the ones that we put in the evidence lane, based on VA's own, the board going to get a decision well within a year. Here we are 3 years later on a lot of those and no decision. And that, there's just no accountability to the board for doing that. It's just, perturbs me quite a bit. It's not fair what the board has done.
It's not fair. And I can't even blame the board. I blame the VA. Kerry, they knew, they put all their resources. So they had resources to go in the new claims, the higher level review, or the board. And they put all of their resources mostly in the new claims and the higher level reviews. And they didn't give the extra resources to the board until they saw this huge backlog. And then they started, but by then it was too late. So anyway, Kerry, what I try to tell my clients is, would you please call your congressman or your senator and ask them, what are you doing about this backlog? I don't want to hear what else you have to say. I want to know what you're doing about the backlog. They need to know of this horrible problem. And how many are there of us that we've complained? They don't care. Each one of our veterans is a voter. And if you get and start calling, maybe something will happen. Otherwise, you're looking at 6 or 8 years for these cases.
And probably my biggest pet peeve on the whole thing about AMA and board,
That's a long list, Kerry.
I have a lot of pet peeves, and keeping them organized, because I tend to do things about some of my pet peeves. I can't do them all. And that is, you didn't this theory that we people used to think about, or if I'm going to go to the back of the line when my case goes back to the Board of Veterans Appeals because it was remanded or something. That never happened in legacy. You kept your docket.
No.
When it went back to the board, you kept your old docket number, so it took its place in line where it was, and that means you usually got a pretty quick decision on remand because you didn't have to wait on everybody that came after you.
And that's still true for
Yeah.
legacy.
Well, for legacy, right? And AMA, the board changed their regulation, and they didn't. Here's the thing, and tell your congressman this: they did not have to. The AMA itself, the actual act that was passed by Congress, did not require the board to do this. They did it on their own. And that is, anytime they remand a case and it comes back to them on appeal, it goes to the back of the line. Now, keep in mind, you have to submit a new appeal to get your case back to the board once it's remanded through AMA, even though the only reason they can remand an AMA case now is if there's a duty to assist era. So they admit if they're remanding a case, they're doing it because VA failed to do something. If VA still denies that benefit, you have to do another 10182, which is the form to appeal to the board. You have to do a new one on that decision, and you go to the back of the line. You don't keep your same docket number, and that is an atrocity by the board. That was one of the best things about going back to the board, is you didn't have to wait all that time. This is an absolute disincentive to appeal to the board. And if it takes you 3 or 4 years or 5 or 6 years for the first appeal, and you got to go back and wait that again, I'm sorry. That to me, that's an unlawful regulation change. At the very least, it's just giving all vets out there the finger. And I'm
Yes.
put it like that. The board did not have to do that. They could easily change their regulation back to the way it was. I've spoke to a number of board judges, and they've given their reason for doing that, and it's all BS.
And what is the reason, other than they have to show they've handled so many cases, and therefore this shows it's handled?
They give the reason that, well, we have these other veterans sitting here and they're waiting for all this time for that's what I'm saying. Their reasoning makes no sense. They just use this excuse that we don't want to delay all these other cases at the board, but you're delaying your oldest cases, artificially, and making them far older. Anyway, it's a problem.
All of you out there, you need to help us. We can only tell you what the problem is. We are complaining. Kerry's a real thorn in their side, and nothing is happening. You need to help us help you. So complain, and also complain about the way that they're not doing the old cases again. They're making them get back at the end of the line. But number one, what are you doing about the BVA backlog? That's what we want to hear. And if they're saying we're working on legacy first, say, great, what happens to all the AMA people who are sitting there? Please call them. They don't know what's going on unless you tell them. Okay, we've ran it enough. Nate, what's next?
All right.
2-part questions. First, the VA just rated me 70% for service connection for PTSD. That's great. This brings my combined rating to 100%, 95% aggregate. Their decision is permanent and total, so they have not scheduled me for any more C&Ps. However, I still have outstanding claims and higher level review. How will they adjudicate them if they don't do a C&P? And do I appeal if they deny again? Second, now that I have service connection for PTSD, will the DB 214 be corrected to show it since separation was due to it readjustment disorder? VA PTSD explanation includes adjustment difficulties. If corrected, would that be considered a medical separation retirement? Ooh, there are a lot of questions there. Yeah. You can have them, Kerry.
Well, I can say no to the last question. Is that considered a medical separation or retirement? No. VA cannot medically separate you or medically retire you from the service. That's something you're going to have to go back to the service and try to get them to do if you really think that's worth it. I would venture to say it may not be. If you had 15 years, 18 years, and you're that close to an actual retirement, maybe, if you were put out through disability and you should be getting a medical retirement instead of a medical separation, maybe. But now for a medical separation purpose, wouldn't do you no good at all. Because they would just separate you medically, especially if you had less than 20 years. You might get severance pay. That severance pay is probably going to be offset due to your compensation. So you're better off just keeping the compensation and getting your VA claim straight.
Right.
Right? Rather than trying to go back and get a medical separation that's not going to do you any good. And about the only thing it could do, unless you're a longevity retired veteran, which that's a whole different story, you probably shouldn't even be in this mix, is if for TRICARE, okay, for healthcare insurance. But that's probably not worth it if you're still going to get 100% through VA. Your family is going to be eligible for Chapter 35 dependents, CHAMP VA, the Civilian Health and Medical Program. Did I think I'm losing some of those questions there?
Well, no, I think that he really wanted to know what first about retirement and second about should I follow through with the higher level review. I assume these are for other claims, and if they are, then let them go because they won't affect the PTSD and the 100%. They would be totally different.
Yeah, right? I would back to the beginning of that question. If you said you got 100%, I would, and it's a combined rating of 100% because it's not in other words, it's not a single 100. You got 95, so you got a scheduler 100% through combined disabilities. Are those extra ones that are still pending? Are they going to change your effective date for that 100%? Or are they going to give you more than 100% going forward? If the answer is no to both of those, then I'd leave it alone. If they've been pending a long time and they're going to get you an earlier effective date, or they're going to increase your benefits to above 100%, which is the exception, not the rule, then maybe you do pursue them. But without knowing more details about it, it's hard to answer it any further. But if you're getting 100% PNT, seriously look at what are those other issues that are still pending. What are they going to do for you? And if they are going to give you extra benefits, and then you might want to continue to pursue it. If they're not, then I would seriously think about whether you want to continue down this path. And I hate to say it, but it's because we so many mistakes by VA these days. I don't know how many cases we have where somebody was 100% and now they're about to get reduced. And it's all because they tried to push for just a little more when it wasn't going to make any difference. And that's just, you don't want to get into that predicament if you can help it. All
right, Kerry, you want to talk about the same problem that I want to talk about, but I would like you to tell them what's going on. We had the PACT Act. We have great benefits there for widows. And what do you see happening?
Okay, so I'm going to try to explain this in a way that makes sense. I have to give you some bit of backstory. I'll try to do it quickly. We're seeing a lot of problems when it comes to surviving spouses across the board in lots of areas, but I want to talk about one specific area. This is not the only area we're seeing problems with surviving spouse cases. So we're talking about surviving spouses filing for DIC and accrued claims. Specifically, this topic is about accrued claims. So an accrued claim is basically benefits that are due and owed to the veteran at the time of his or her death. Now, it doesn't mean that a decision's been made and they're going to pay benefits and then the veteran passes away and he's not around to collect those benefits. It could be a pending claim, a pending appeal, on a case that's not been decided yet or not been decided in that veteran's favor. The veteran passes away. The widow files for substitution and files a 534 for accrued benefits and DIC, which is typically kind of how most of them go. VA will decide the DIC. They will decide the accrued. And we're seeing a problem in the accrued side of this in a lot of very specific types of cases where the veteran was a military retiree. So let me back up from surviving spouses and talk just a minute about how VA does benefits and does rating decisions for military retirees. If you're a vet with 20 years of service and you're getting military retirement pay and VA awards benefits to the point where you're going to be entitled to get concurrent receipt of both your VA disability pay and your military retired pay, then initially VA is going to do what's called a DFAS offset. DFAS stands for Defense Finance and Accounting. They're the folks who manage most retirees' retirement pay through the military. Once VA issues a rating decision and it's awarding a certain benefit that qualifies for concurrent receipt, which means it has to be 50% or higher on a combined rating, or 10% or higher for a disability that came from a Purple Heart. All right, but for ease of reference, let's just say a 50% disability rating or higher. That's going to entitle you to concurrent receipt of all your VA compensation and all of your military retired pay. So let's say you get 100% awarded, all right, back 2 years, and you're a military retiree, and that back pay is going to result in $48,000, you know, or something to that effect. And you've been getting retirement pay that whole time. Initially, VA is going to withhold that back pay, right? They're going to send a message to DFAS, a silent message. We can't see it in the system until DFAS responds. DFAS is going to do what's called an audit error worksheet, which is basically a spreadsheet that's got all your military retirement pay of what you both are owed and the total amount you should receive and the amount you might have received. Your same thing for the VA, what VA paid you, what they owe you. And in the end, that audit error worksheet is what VA uses to tell where DOD tells VA, this is what you owe the veteran. Don't get wrapped up in that so much, because if you're 100% and they withheld that $48,000 in order to do the DFAS offset. And the reason they do that, I'm kind of getting off track. The reason they do that is to make sure that there's no overpayment through retirement pay. All right. So they have to verify the retirement pay of the retiree before they release all the withheld compensation. Once they do that, they're going to release the compensation back to the veteran where it should have been in the first place. In the end, if you're 100%, it doesn't matter if they do the DFAS offset or not in reality, because you're going to be entitled to your full retirement pay and your full disability pay. Right. They have to follow that process first. We can debate on whether they need to or not, but that's what they do. So picture that same type of case being done for a surviving spouse whose veteran spouse that passed away was a military retiree. And they're going to go back and pay that surviving spouse accrued benefits based on an appeal that was pending when that veteran died. Now, the same thing applies there. There's that widow, because the veteran was a retiree. Now let's say that widow is going to get benefits at the 100% rate on the accrued claim. We use the same fact pattern here. Say that widow is going to get $48,000 in back pay that the veteran would have received had he won his claim and not passed away. That's what's called an accrued benefit. It's now due and owed to the veteran. They're going to pay it to the surviving spouse. Okay. But they're usually, historically at least, will do a DFAS offset for the surviving spouse also. Okay. And when that happens, it should follow the same pattern as a live veterans case. In other words, they withhold the back pay, send a message to DFAS. DFAS verifies how much retirement pay that veteran received. VA comes back and releases that, we'll say that 48,000 in the example I'm using, to the surviving spouse. If that happens, all things are good. That's what's supposed to happen. The other way to do it is not to withhold the compensation at all and just pay everything to their surviving spouse. It doesn't matter which way they do. One's going to get the payment to the surviving spouse faster. They don't have to wait on DFAS. The other one's going to slow it down because they have to wait on DFAS. In both scenarios, the widow is due 100% of the funds that was initially withheld, right? What we're finding is in a lot of the surviving spouse cases where they initially withheld for the retirement pay, 6 months goes by, a year goes by, and that surviving spouse has not received the accrued benefits that they withheld because of the retirement pay. We call up DFAS. DFAS says, we don't have anything pending on that surviving spouse, even though VA withheld the retroactive compensation because of the retirement pay. So what I'm saying in a long way of trying to make it short here is widows, mostly widows, sometimes widowers, are not receiving the accrued benefits they are due when their surviving spouses, when their deceased veteran spouses were retirees. And they're not receiving it because, from what we can tell, DFAS is not getting the information from VA, even though they withheld the back pay, and it just vanishes from there. So it could be, we have one that we're working on right now. VA owes the widow $41,000. This was about 7 months ago when they did the decision. DFAS has no record of them having anything that would generate that audit error worksheet like they would do with a live veteran in order for VA to release the funds that they withheld to the widow. And we're seeing this more and more. I recently had a conference with what's called a SVSR, which is a senior VSR, which is not a rater, but a person that authorizes the rating decisions. Okay, they are more knowledgeable on the whole offset program because they're the ones that kind of process that. This person told me that no, for surviving spouse cases for retirees, we shouldn't even be doing the withholding because DFAS doesn't process retired pay cases for surviving spouses. Now, after this person told me this, they then sent me a manual provision, an M21 manual provision that says no, VA is to do the withholding. So the manual said the exact opposite of what this authorizer was telling me. That the authorizer was telling me if what they're telling me was accurate, the VA should not be withholding any compensation for accrued purposes to a surviving spouse when their veteran spouse was a retiree. Because if they do, DFAS is not going to process it, and years later, that widow is still owed money that she may not even remotely be aware of.
So what do you do about it, Kerry? What are you doing?
First, you have to determine, is there been a rating decision awarding a surviving spouse an accrued benefit, right, from a claim that the veteran had pending or on appeal when he died, and is that veteran a retiree? Okay, because if it's not a retiree, they're not getting retirement pay, they're not withholding anything. Then this problem doesn't apply to those kind of cases. So only if the veteran was a retiree from the military, they were getting retirement pay, and VA withheld some of the back pay that would have been given to the veteran, and they never did come back around and give that same back pay to the widow. If that's the case, then every one of those cases like that, VA currently owes those widows. there is no rule.
So Kerry, who do they contact if they're out there? Who do they? I always love congressmen and reps. Then
That's one, because we're having problems with it. Okay,
yeah.
I mean, on who to contact, how to get it fixed. Now when we find it, we're getting them fixed, but not without some bit of effort.
Yeah.
You're going to need to contact somebody at the local regional office who decided the case, and get what you really need is a senior level employee to take some action on the case that's going to, somebody senior enough to realize, hey, we've got funds here that we withheld and never paid. There's no claim form you can file.
Yeah.
To get it fixed. You can do an appeal, like a higher level review, if you're within your appellate window, just for the purposes of saying, hey, you guys still owe me my back pay that you never paid, that you withheld from this rating decision. Honestly, if you're trying to do this on your own, it very well might be something that it's going to be above a lot of people's heads. I would use your representative to verify whether this has occurred to you, and use your representative to fight this. If you don't have one, I would suggest getting one. One that will be able to tell if this has occurred, because this is complex. You've got to go back through the file. You've got to figure out what happened when they did the accrued benefit. Did they withhold? Why did they withhold? What's happened since they withheld? It's not the easiest thing in the world, but once you have your head wrapped around it on a specific case, then you know what happened. It's a matter of figuring out who to contact in VA to get it fixed. If you're just out there on your own, that's going to be hard to do. I wish I could give you a number to call, a person to call. It's going to be difficult. I don't know how many of these are out there, but I've seen cases where VA did not withhold and the surviving spouse got all of their accrued benefits. But I've seen a lot of cases where they did withhold, and it stopped. Everything stopped at that point. They're paying the widow maybe the DIC and some of the accrued, but the rest of the accrued just vanished, and there's no claims pending. And so, if it's true to the extent that I think it is, it's a very, very big problem for VA. Now, I have some feelers into central office trying to figure it out, because right now, even though the manual says what it says in some places, my goal right now first is to figure out what is the official way it's supposed to be done. Should VA be withholding this back pay on a widow's case, or should they not? I'm having problems just getting that official answer, which that should not be a problem getting that answer.
I know it seems like each area of the country does it different. I guess it's just whoever is in charge of that office seems, because I see them paying directly, withholding, going to DFAST, all of that.
This would primarily be when we're talking about surviving spouse cases, it would be the PMCs, Philly, St. Paul, and who's the other PMC? Milwaukee, I think. And I've seen it through all of them. All three of the PMCs. And so right now we're trying to figure out how big the problem is. We can only really look at the problem on a case by case basis. And most cases aren't those of retirees. So, granted, there are a lot of retirees out there, but the majority of the cases that we're going to get are not going to be retirees. So it's right now it's anecdotal of what we're seeing, but we're seeing it enough that I know it's a trend. I just don't know how much of one.
Yeah, and with widows and widowers, I feel really bad because they have the least amount of help in figuring this out. They're already going to get less than the veteran would have gotten, so it's a problem. All right, there are a lot of questions that I see coming up about Social Security and VA and the way that they work. So I want to just real briefly tell you why people get confused. First of all, if you're disabled, file a claim for Social Security. Don't just go, if you can't work, Don't just file for VA. Some veterans tell me, well, I wanted to get that done first. Well, here's the way Social Security works. There are two types of Social Security. One is Social Security disability, where you have worked and paid money into the system and you are insured. You are only insured for a limited amount of time. In other words, when they set up disability, it wasn't like retirement. You have to show you've been out working in the labor market, paying your Social Security taxes, and it has to be 5 out of the last 10 years. And so they have each year that you're required to make so much money and pay taxes on it. And if you are, then you're insured for that year. When you stop working, if you have worked steadily up until that date, at the end of the next 5 years, you're not going to be insured anymore. It goes, and people are talking about insured date. That's what the insured date means. What is the date you're last insured, the last covered? So you have to show you became disabled before the end of that date. Okay. So for Social Security disability, unlike VA, you don't have to show why you're disabled. You only have to show you can't work and you were unable to work before that date. All right. The other kind of Social Security is the old welfare program. Even though you didn't pay enough into the system, you're insured if you can't work under the Supplemental Security Income Program, SSI. That is income based. You have to be disabled, but you have to show your income. And I don't know if it's 770, it's something very, very low. Okay, so those are the two Social Security programs for disability. Over here, we have two VA programs. The one we always talk about here is compensation and pension. You are being paid for a disability that was caused by your service. You get all that money. There is no offset. But there's another VA called the pension. And that's for people who serve during time of war and cannot work because they're disabled. That is income based. So if somebody is getting that benefit, then they're going to look at their total income before they're allowed any other benefit. Okay. If they're getting SSI, that's what they're looking at, the income. So veterans who get compensation, they're service connected for compensation, $3,600 a month. They can also get all of their Social Security if it's regular disability. It's only when you deal with the SSI or the pension program that you need to worry about these onsets. Or they need, okay, but file for both of them. It's really important. Okay, next question, Nate. They also asked, does it help to be disabled? Okay, so yes, it helps to show Social Security found you disabled, but often they find you disabled for a number of problems, not all of which you are service connected or may be service connected for. If it's just a mental problem and you're service connected for the mental problem, or that's your claim in the VA, yes, it can help, but it is not controlling. Each one of the judges can make up their own mind about that. Okay, Nate. If C&P medical examiner confirms service connection, but the rater decide not to agree because of conflicting information in the medical records, is an HLI in order? What do you think, Kerry?
Most probably. I do that a lot with cases. If I have a favorable evidence and the rater just discounts that favorable evidence over unfavorable, depending on the evidence, depending on the case, I will usually ask for a higher level review with a conference so that I can discuss that favorable evidence specifically with the DRO. Usually it turns out in our favor, not always. But yeah, I think that's a good example of when an HLR can help.
Right. How does one get a copy of their Army medical records from 1968 to 1969? They should be in the claim file. If they're not, that's a problem.
Yeah, that's where I would go first. If you file claims with VA, I would ask for a complete copy of the claims file to include your service personnel and medical records. They're usually in there, even when you might think they're not. So I would start there because that's just the easiest. Probably easier getting them from that than the archives. Otherwise, you need to go to the archives.
Okay. Nate? I have my three claims denied without going to a C&P, compensation and pension exam. The list of evidence and documents listed on the letter of decision was different from what's uploaded to the VA page. Higher level review or another venue?
I think it depends. There's not really enough info to answer that. Um, we always, not always, but a lot of times we see stuff listed as evidence in the rating, especially if it's a supplemental claim rating, meaning it's done by the kind of the first line raters. That does not include everything it should include that's in the file. For example, we might give them a private medical opinion, and they don't list it as evidence, don't talk about it in the rating, and we don't know if it was looked at or not. So we end up doing a higher level review on a case like that. Uh, but if you have valid claims and they didn't examine you, then I would think you might have a duty to assist error right off the bat, depending on the claims. And that is good for an HLR because
Right.
they are pretty good at making sure, VA goes back and complies with their duty to assist. Doesn't mean they'll comply correctly, but it's something.
So that's one of the most successful ways to get an HLR is saying you failed, the veteran alleged this, the VA failed to give them a compensation and pension exam. That's a duty to assist era. And I find the VA will almost always go back and do that. So look at the reason why you were denied. Were you denied because they've just looked through your medical records and didn't give you a compensation and pension exam? If that's so, you've got a great duty to assist era, and you should do that right away with an HLR. I have a buddy who served in Vietnam, but his records were restored in the fire. His DD-214 only says he was deployed to Okinawa. Should he hire an attorney to prove his deployment to Vietnam?
Well, maybe. I mean, attorneys, even an attorney's got to have some evidence to sort of hook onto, in my opinion. But yeah, and I would not assume they were destroyed in the fire.
I wouldn't either. But I definitely would write to as many different, like the National Archives. I get the claim file. I'd also like to see if there were, a lot of times people leave the military and go in the reserves and all their medical records end up there, not in their claim file. So often there are other places that you can look, but that's hard. If you can't prove that you were there. The other thing that I try to do is here's an example. I've had a lot of veterans who thought they were blue water, that they were actually in the in the 12-mile limit for Vietnam, and they weren't. But let's say they have a cancer case and they're an aviation mechanic. They're using a lot of toxins and things like that may be causing the cancer, the Parkinson's, or they may have seen a lot of things that caused PTSD. So the other thing I would encourage you to do is think outside the box. If you can't prove you were in Vietnam, stop beating on that drum and look at what maybe you can prove, because I find that we're much more successful with that than beating on he was in Vietnam, he wasn't Vietnam, the log records are gone or whatever. So always look to see if you have another option. And the same is for people that were in Vietnam that were really in Okinawa. Okinawa had lots of Agent Orange every day. In fact, I think there was a question, Kerry, about what was the latest thing about Agent Orange in Okinawa? And it went to you. I'm not sure what the question was.
Yeah, it might be the 2022 NDAA report.
Yes, I think that was it.
Yeah, there's a blurb in that report that talks about them using Agent Orange on Okinawa, and I'm not kidding here, up through 2013.
Right.
Now, that it's just a blurb, but it's in the National Defense Authorization Act report, meaning the NDA is the bill, the report is the congressional history behind it, the legislative intent, that kind of thing that explains the bill. It's really hard for me to think they would have put that in there without some source documents showing
exactly
that they actually use the herbicides like that document says. And we have not been able to get the source documents. If there are any, we are trying. If that's true, then man, that's big.
That's really big, because it's a lot longer than just the Vietnam era.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Look at other options to prove your case. I find that people go for years and years and years doing the same thing. That's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, and you don't get anything different. Look at your different options, because sometimes it's so much easier just to take another route. I was using this chemical to clean the tools on my aircraft maintenance kit, and this is known to cause whatever cancer you have. So just think of outside the box. Nate? Hello? Also, can you explain what duty to assist means? Kerry?
So duty to assist is there's a statute, in other words, a law passed by Congress, which is the highest level kind of law, except for the Supreme Court or the Constitution. And that law says VA has a duty to assist a claimant in the development of their claim, essentially. And so duty to assist, we DTA for short. But in other words, you file a claim with VA, there's say the merits of the claim are solid, you've got a disability, there was an event in service, they're not sure if there's a medical link between them. VA has a duty to assist you to develop that claim, and that duty in that circumstance would be to give you an examination and get a medical opinion as to whether it's as likely as not that the condition you got is related to the event in service. All right, that's part of their duty to assist. You file a claim and VA has to get your service medical records from the archives. That's part of their duty to assist you in developing that claim by getting federal records that you identify, and that includes your service records, your VA treatment records. They have a duty to assist you to get private treatment records, as long as you alert them to their existence and you give them the right paperwork. So that's essentially what that is. Duty to assist is VA's statutorily obligated duty to help develop your claim. And because of that, VA can easily violate that duty.
And
does by not giving you the exam that the law requires, by not obtaining certain records that you identify, any number of other things. That is a failure of VA in their duty to assist you in developing that claim. So it could be something as simple as VA got an opinion in your case, just like they were supposed to have, but maybe that opinion has it's a negative opinion, has no rationale. The examiner just come to this bare conclusion. There's case law that says that's a conclusory medical opinion and is therefore not adequate for rating purposes. Well, that's a duty to assist violation, because it's not enough for VA to give you an exam and get a medical opinion. The opinion has to be adequate for rating. If it's not, it's a duty to assist error. So we can use that in all kinds of ways to shoot down some of the negative stuff that VA does, or at least try to. So it's a broad-based duty, and it's not one that VA can usually shirk for very long and get away with.
For those of us who have done this years and years, what originally was happening is the veteran would file a claim and the VA would say, you have to prove your claim, and they wouldn't help at all. And I think that's why law was changed and saying, you've got to help these people. So these veterans who say they were in the Vietnamese water when they were on boats, the VA has to research to see whether or not that is true. That's their duty to assist. They do a very poor job of it, but that's their job. So there are lots of duty. Unfortunately, we see what we call duty to deny. We'll put in a decision, an evaluation from our doctor showing that the veteran's PTSD should be service connected and why, and what their rating should be. And the VA immediately sends our veteran out for another exam for a doctor to say it isn't service connected and he doesn't have PTSD. So unfortunately, like a lot of things with the VA, we see this used against the veteran. But I find that I get almost always a favorable result from a higher level review when I can point out a duty to assist. So they're very powerful and use them. Nate? Are you seeing cases of chronic kidney disease, neuropathy, and Afib related to JP5 in drinking water on carriers? I haven't. Have you?
Now, I've seen cases where a veteran claims that there was JP5 contamination in drinking water on a ship. Um, that is, proving that, saying that is one thing, proving that is a different thing.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we've had cases where we've been able to favorably link things like kidney disease and sometimes other things, maybe like neuropathy, to toxin exposure like JP5 or solvents or something like that. So it's not unheard of to be able to link certain conditions to JP5 exposure. Um, but that's a little different than proving JP5 was in the drinking water of ships.
Right.
The two systems are separate. Not to say that it can't get contaminated, um, but I think you would really need some evidence from the ship that says, yes, there was uh, contaminated drinking water, for a certain amount of time on the ship. Um, I've seen lots of people claim that, yeah, they could smell it in the water and this and that, but very few times have I seen records where the ship actually acknowledges, yeah,
Right.
that's something they're going to want to get fixed real quick because the captain of the ship's got to drink that water too.
That's right.
And, so I believe that it exists. I believe that it's happened because I've seen it on a couple of occasions, but there's a lot of ships out there, and getting that kind of evidence it's not easy. If you can, then go for it. But yeah, you're gonna have to produce some kind of proof.
What do you think about waiving the duty to assist if you feel like you've got all the evidence you need there?
I think you need to be careful.
Yeah.
And you can, but now I've seen people waive it at the board before, and the board turned around and denied the case
Yeah.
by saying, had the veteran not waived the duty to assist, we could remand it and fix this problem. But you waived it. Sorry for your bad luck. We're going to deny it now.
Yeah.
Now
And that's
they're
from
not,
something you did at the regional office, waiving the duty to assist
yeah,
there.
they're not supposed to do that. Just because you waive it doesn't mean they have to honor your waiver. If they see that they made a mistake and they want to fix that mistake, they still have the authority to do that. So I would be careful
Yeah.
waiving the duty to assist. It's a small thing, sort of, in a lot. I mean, that's probably not the way to say it, um, but sort of it is. Once it's done, it's done.
And you may luck out or you may not. And that's why that's the problem with these questions we get. They're broad and we don't know exactly, all of the facts. And so we're just giving you general what we've seen, sometimes good, sometimes bad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one more question, Nate. And I am sorry we haven't gotten to a lot of these. Hi, can a review result in an increase or decrease to an existing claim? I had one for PTSD and haven't heard anything for 6 weeks. I also put in for TDIU. VA requests information company not providing.
Well, the employer is not providing the info after a TDIU claim is rather common. I mean, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
The big thing is that VA has procedures in place that mandate that they ask. Because the employer does not reply, does not mandate that they have to deny that claim. But if they don't ask and that case gets pulled for some kind of quality review, then that person could get hit with a quality error for not following all the procedures to develop a TDIU claim. So that's for the last one there. As far as the rest, can they increase or decrease? Yes, they can. Usually, if it's just a review, it's a continued rating at the same rating that it was. But there's no rule that says it has to be that way. If you had one 6 weeks ago and you have not received a decision, I would say there's two possibilities. Well, maybe more than two, but one, they just haven't gotten to it yet, and they haven't issued the decision, so you'll still be getting it in the mail. Or two, they just did something internal like what's called a deferred rating decision, which doesn't get mailed out to the claimant, and CC the current rating at its current rate. Now, even if they do that, they usually just send you a letter telling you your benefits are going to continue at the current rate.
Right.
So you should get some kind of notice after that review. So, but
And Kerry, I'm with you. If you've had C&P exams and nothing's happened for 6 weeks, you need to contact the VA and see what's going on. I mean, usually once you've had the C&P exam, something happens after 6 weeks.
yeah.
So I would make sure you're moving along. Thank you, all of you, for being with us. I'm sorry we don't get to answer all your questions. One of the things we try to do here is bring to your awareness things that we're finding problems with the VA. And sometimes it's not something you're concerned about, but there are people out there that we feel like we need to get to them as well. So I hope you all have a great week. Kerry, it's wonderful being with you as always.
Thank
Any
you.
last words?
Sorry, I was long-winded and took up a bunch of questions.
All right. Everybody have a great week.